present myself. I'm going to introduce this event. Thank you, Anna, from the Research and Postgraduate Office for starting this recording. So my name is Maria Lopez. I'm Deputy Director of the Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Center. My colleague, Louise Ryan, who is Professor and Director of this center, is unfortunately, she's not able to join us today because she's doing quite a lot of interesting research with interviews, etc. So she couldn't, and she sends her apologies to all of you. So we are here today to listen to the editors of this wonderful volume that has been just published in January 2022, and the name of the volume is Migration in the Making of the Gulf Space, Social, Political and Cultural Dimensions. And this volume combines visual and literary analysis and regional ethnographic studies as part of a more general political reflection on the role of migrants and non-citizens in the process of settling in the Arab states of the Gulf region. So we have today the two editors of the volume, Antia Mato Bouzas and Lorenzo Cassini. Before I introduce them and just let them talk and do their presentations, let me just note for all of you that we will have the presentations first. If you got any questions and you need to like write it down or just leave it there just for you not to forget, just write it in the chat. And at the end, we will let everybody, those interested in posting their questions to contributors and editors, talk. They can connect a micro, or again, they can just write the questions in the chat. So yeah, so let me introduce Antia and Lorenzo, and then it's all to you guys. So Antia Mato Bouzas is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the London Metropolitan University, and she's associate researcher at Leibniz-Zentrum Modernen Orient, excuse my German accent, and she's the author of Kashmir as a Borderland, The Politics of Space and Belonging Across the Line of Control, published in 2019. And Dr. Lorenzo Cassini is Associate Professor of Arabic Language and Literature at the University of Messina. And he is a Jean Monnet Fellow of the European University Institute for a year and has taught at several Italian universities. So I pass that to you, Antia, and then to Lorenzo, and then to the contributors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are. And I would like to thank also Maria and Luis from the GDI Research Center, and also Hussein Husami and Anna Kim from the Research Office, who have organized and hosted this event. I also want to name the other contributors in this volume who are present today, who are going to intervene. Elizabeth Derderian from the College of Worcester, Nadine Dakak from the University of Edinburgh, Jafar Alou from Nanyang Technological University, Mohammed Shafiq Ferin Kurail from Manipal Center of Humanities, and I'm not sure if he has joined us yet, Deepak Unnikrishnan from New York University, Abu Dhabi. So I would like to begin by saying that Migration in the Making of the Gulf Space is a book that centers on how migrants and migration processes generally shape the Gulf region in specific ways. Therefore, this book essentially focuses on interactions that takes place at various societal levels. We conceive the Gulf essentially as a transnational space, and most of the contributions to this volume from different disciplines, social science disciplines and humanities, are not by specialists. We don't claim that don't follow the traditional area studies division. So most of us don't claim to be a specialist in the Gulf. What we do is we rather focus on the Gulf because of the influence that this region exerts on specific social groups and on other regions. So some of the contributions of this volume highlight these dimensions, such as the works by Jafar Alul on the social mobility aspirations of Europeans of Maghrebi origin in the UAE or Emirates, or Nadine Dakak on her discussion of the Gulf literature by non-citizens authors. So Migration in the Making of the Gulf Space is not a book that examines migration or a focus on the study of specific communities in the Gulf region. Others have done this before us, and they have done it well. Our focus is on spatial issues. Space is central in the volume, and we work on two basic assumptions: that migration is regarded as internal to the Gulf societies, and the other assumption is that through migration, the Gulf is able to exert an influence in other regions. For example, we have the work of the analysis of Karim Korail on migrant photography in Kerala. The book focuses on the contemporary Gulf, and therefore attention is paid to processes of nation building and modernization. A case in point is Elizabeth Derderian's discussion on the state's display of tolerance as a way to negotiate forms of social inclusion for certain groups, such as in the case of artists. Migration in the Gulf is also essentially framed as temporary, and this has consequences for the way we understand socioeconomic processes, because migrants are at us from the management of the abstract space. Are at us from the abstract space of economic management. And this temporariness also suggests that migrants spend a fixed period of their lives in the Gulf Arab states and then leave without a trace. The reality, however, is far more complex, because there are generations of the same family who have lived and worked most of their lives in these countries. There are children, now adults, who were brought up in the Gulf and have limited exposure to the home societies of their parents. Migrants have been replaced from time to time, and they have occupied city spaces and have shaped them in specific ways. It comes to my mind now the district of Salmiya in Kuwait, Matra in Oman, or parts of Bastakia in Dubai. This temporal dimension is central to the articulation of forms of belonging and membership, but also in the strategies for the portrayal of the Gulf space as cosmopolitan and aspirational. As a Sudanese, I became interested in the Gulf by following a migrant group from northeastern Pakistan to Kuwait, and my own research made me aware of the importance of the volume of existing mobilities in the global south and the spatial hierarchies which are being established. The Gulf Arab states and the descending migrant regions share a history of indirect rule and colonization. This shared past is present in the ways migrants deployed their relationship to the Gulf region. In the group I examined, for example, mostly low-skilled and semi-skilled workers, citizenship is not an issue for them. Rather, being in the Gulf functions as a sort of empowerment, because this group, when they return home, they have some economic power, and also they have a very precarious citizenship status in Pakistan. They cannot vote in the general elections because they are from a specific region. So citizenship, however, is a sort of naturalization or membership is essential for many migrants in the Gulf, because it entails the possibility of having a home of a certain kind, a home that can prevent further compulsory mobility, because it offers security in many aspects of life. Also, citizenship is linked to recognition for those who have an emotional and effective attachment to the Gulf societies. For this reason, citizenship is an aspect that permeates this work in different ways. In fact, the constant portrayal of the Gulf as a both cosmopolitan and aspirational space, which are the two constituent parts of this volume, revolves around the struggle for citizenship. Even the work of Rana Al-Mutawa that focuses on Emirati women, so it focuses on the citizens of the nation, discusses the negotiation of membership through women's access to and use of city spaces in Dubai. So are more or less the main lines of what this book is about. And now I would like to give the floor to Lorenzo Casini. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay, can you see me? Okay. Thank you, Antia. Thank you to the London Met and the GDI Research Center for hosting the launch of this collective child of ours, of whom we are immensely proud. I'm very excited to share again, at least the virtual space with the authors or the co-authors of the book after such a long time. As Antia explained just now, in the book, the experience of migrant populations in the Gulf is approached as an intrinsic part of the Gulf space. Any space, as we all know, is made of material and immaterial dimensions that intertwine. A significant achievement of this book, Migration in the Making of the Gulf Space, is that it sheds light on the importance of the immaterial and, more specifically, imaginal, I would say, imaginal component of space in the Gulf as an object of political contention. The notion of the imaginal has been used by the political science philosopher Chiara Bottici to merge the two different concepts of imagination as individual faculty and the social imaginary, which refers to different significations with which individuals are within which individuals are socialized. The imaginal dimension of space is made of languages, discourses, and representations with different social prestige and recognition. The material fabric of this immaterial fabric has a decisive impact on the material lives of people, their memories, senses of belonging, and everyday life experiences. The Gulf space, thus, is constituted also by specific imaginaries of national identities, of the role of migrants within each state, and of implicit racial hierarchies. Dominant social imaginaries, which are largely the result of space-sponsored cultural policies, are not necessarily accepted and appropriated by migrants. Migrant narratives or counter-narratives do exist and are testified in our book by Deepak Unnikrishnan through his answers to my questions in the conclusions, and by Nadine Dakak in her study of Unnikrishnan's novel Temporary People and Jaber's novel Samrawit. State-sponsored representations of national communities and of the place of migrants within them, however, are not univocal and unchanging over time. This is very well evidenced by chapter 1 of the book, Exhibiting Tolerance, in which Elizabeth Derderian examines the place assigned to migrants artists by the United Arab Emirates in different rounds of the Venice Biennale between 2009 and 2017. Derderian shows how this managing of non-national, non-citizen artists within the pavilion and their visibility changed over times. But even when they are appropriated by migrants, dominant imaginaries are transformed by their experience and their specific life trajectories. In chapter 4, Ja'far Alul shows how European migrants of Maghrebi origins in Dubai tend to endorse state narratives of cosmopolitanism in order to unsettle the former European order of things in which they felt marginalized as Muslims or not fully European citizens. Thus, while in Dubai, this migrant community contributes to co-reproduce locally salient hegemonic norms and social hierarchizations. Chapter 5 by Shafiq Karim Kourail highlights the translocal dimension of this process of appropriation. Since the 1970s, taking and sharing migrants from Kerala, taking and sharing pictures of themselves in specific dresses, assigned different meanings to their dressing codes and contributed to shape the South Indian imaginary of the Gulf migrants from Kerala, known as Pravasis. This was just a brief sketch of the imaginal dimension of the Gulf space occupied by migrants. But I would like now to leave the floor to the contributors who are the best entitled to speak about what have written in the several chapters of this book. I propose to follow the order given by the index. So with the author of, we will start with the author of chapter 1, Elizabeth Derderian. Beth Derderian teaches at the College of Worcester, and she is the author of the chapter 1, whose title is Exhibiting Tolerance, Citizenship, Contingency, and Contemporary Art in the UAE Pavilion, 2009-2017. So Elizabeth, or Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So thank you so much to the organizers of today's book launch, and also, of course, thank you to Antia and Lorenzo for bringing us all together way back in Berlin in the before times, before the pandemic, and nice to see everyone here today. My research, I'm interested in the connection between museums and nation building projects. So my first research project centered in the UAE around the building of the Louvre and the Guggenheim Museum, which I've been working on for about 12 years now. So a lot of the scholarship that's on museums and nation building projects focuses on citizens and the sort of inclusion of various citizens. And the UAE has, as of course, many of you know, a majority foreign population. So therefore, it was a really interesting case for me to look at how museums and the nation building processes happen in a place where there's a majority foreign population. So for this particular chapter, I did discourse analysis along with ethnographic interviews to focus on the UAE pavilion at the Venice Biennale. The first of those pavilions was 2009, and I end with the 2017 pavilion. My overall argument is that migrants become central. They're integral to projects of national representation in the UAE, and that's actually precisely because they are not citizens. Migrants and non-citizens are used to showcase the Emirati state that it is tolerant of its multicultural population. And in this process, it requires that these artists never become citizens, because as non-citizens, they can serve as proof of the state's tolerance. So they are at times considered part of the Emirati state, but also not. So I call them contingent citizens in the chapter. In the words of one of my interlocutors, they are Emirati enough to represent the state sometimes, and at other times they're excluded. So this sort of contingent citizenship allows the state to acknowledge and benefit from these very talented migrant and non-citizen artists, and yet maintain the state as ethnically homogeneous. So in 2009 at the first pavilion, this was shortly after the 2006 announcement of plans for the Guggenheim and Louvre Abu Dhabi, and then subsequently, there was the creation of what became Art Dubai and Abu Dhabi Art, two commercial art fairs in the UAE. And really, after 2006, we see the beginnings of an arts boom. So it made sense that by 2009, the Emirates would join the Venice Biennale, which is one of the most prestigious art events in the world, and one that has pavilions by nation. So it's a great example to look at national representation. The 2009 pavilion focused on the work of Lamia Gargash, who is an Emirati photographer. She was at the time 27 years old, and there were several other artists that were represented in a small group show in addition to her feature. And these artists include Hassan Sharif, Abdissam Abdulaziz, Huda Saeed Saif, and Tarek El Ghussein. Of those, Tarek El Ghussein was the only one that was not an Emirati citizen, and the way he's described is consistently a Palestinian born in Kuwait, emphasizing his long ties to the region, even while he is marked as a non-citizen. And in this pavilion, a lot of the Emirati citizenship, is essentially the unmarked norm. The focus of the pavilion, I argue, was really national pride and really to assert the legitimacy of Emirati artists. In the intervening years until 2017, the UAE art scene continued to grow, and the subsequent pavilions in Venice really continued to focus on citizen artists. In 2017, curator Hamad Nassar selected 5 artists that, quote, represent the diverse and complex demographics of the UAE. He focused on artists who called the UAE home, and he also commissioned a diverse group of writers and curators to produce programming and texts. So this was the first time that the contributions of non-citizens were really highlighted at the Venice Biennale. So I argue that, however, using a diverse population to claim tolerance is essentially a flawed argument. This move ignores the coercive powers at play. It focuses on diversity as an end in itself. And questions of who can represent the nation are still quite salient, not just in the UAE. For example, last year, Zeynep Sedera was selected to represent France at the Venice Biennale, and the fact that she is of Algerian origin was contested in the media. So contests like these over who can and cannot represent the state and the role that migrants play in representing the state, these are important indications of power, diversity, and inclusion. Excuse me. Thank you. I will now pass the baton.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Can I speak?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Beth. I hope the voices will come back soon. Thank you, Beth Derderian. So we have also Nadine Dakak with us, who is the author of the second chapter. Nadine is now teaching or researching at the University of Edinburgh. I think she was able to activate her video. Nadine, are you here with us?
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yeah. The title of her chapter is, and we can see you now. The title of her chapter is "The Gulf as an Unhomely Home: Reconfiguring Citizenship and Belonging in Diasporic Narratives on Second-Generation Migrants." So, Nadine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I just want to thank the organizers first for making this event happen, and also thank you so much to you, Antia, and to Lorenzo for your efforts in editing the book, and as Beth said, for bringing us all together 2 years ago. Memories I look back at fondly now after the pandemic, unfortunately. I hope you're all well, the contributors as well. So just briefly, the chapter that I contributed to this volume very much reflects my overall research interests in how migration to the Gulf has been tackled in literary and cultural production. Primarily Arabic fiction, but also Arab fiction in English and non-Arab fiction in English or in translation. Even though the Gulf states have been receiving migrants from South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and neighboring countries for decades, and have become semi-permanent homes for these migrants, as you all know, there have been only some scattered efforts to appreciate the impact that this migration history and its contemporary reality have had on literary and cultural production from both within and outside the Gulf region. So of course, there are many reasons why it's important to appreciate this impact and to explore whether a body of literary production on Gulf migration exists in the first place, because it's not always so visible. Whether we can, for example, identify a genre of Gulf migration fiction that transcends the geographic, national, and linguistic boundaries that typically define a national literature. And I obviously cannot get into these reasons here because I don't have the time, but I would say that one primary reason that calls for this investigation and that has risen to the surface in recent years is the increasing visibility of exclusionary nationalist narratives in most of the Gulf states, and also increasing contestation of these narratives by younger generations of migrants who perhaps refuse to take this exclusion for granted in the same way in which older generations have done, and who are more persistently questioning dominant conceptions of the Gulf migrant and of what it means to live one's whole life in a country without being able to comfortably call it home, hence the title of my chapter. So I'm particularly interested in literature that contests these exclusionary narratives and that rethinks what it means to belong to the Gulf beyond the dominant conceptions of belonging that are permitted by official discourses, which are often centered on national and cultural affiliation, whether through one's citizenship status or through the visible performance of a certain ethnic and cultural identity. As Lorenzo mentioned, my chapter looks at two narratives. One is an Arabic novel. It's called Samrawit by Eritrean author Haji Jaber, who was a second-generation migrant in Saudi Arabia, particularly in Jeddah. And the other narrative is a story in Deepak Unnikrishnan's book, Temporary People. And Deepak is obviously here with us today and is a contributor to the book. And the story from Temporary People is centered on second-generation Indian kids in the UAE, and particularly in Abu Dhabi. And I emphasize that these are the cities because the narratives are very much entrenched within the cities in which they are set rather than the country as a whole. And that's why I say Jeddah and Abu Dhabi. I take an interest in these two narratives and I bring them together because they depict alternative forms of migrant attachment to Gulf spaces, attachments that do not exercise nationalist tropes that conform to dominant perceptions of how a citizen of a Gulf country needs to project their belonging through, let's say, nationalist allegiance, etc., etc. Rather, these narratives assert the role of everyday lived experiences in giving migrants the right to stake claims to the places that they inhabit. And this, I argue, challenges official or nationalist conceptualizations of citizenship and belonging in the Gulf, conceptualizations that are obviously built upon the exclusion of the non-citizen or the migrant other. So while literary and cultural works that deal with Gulf migration do not necessarily have to offer counter-narratives, and I'm very careful here and I refrain here and elsewhere in my work from adopting this lens of resistance or subversion, because it can end up reproducing conceptions that are just as essentialist of the Gulf migrant. I nonetheless show in this chapter that there is indeed much space for exploring such counter-narratives in the literary work that is emerging on the Gulf. And its potential also comes from the way it enables us to bring in comparative approaches. So here I bring a work in Arabic with a work that is written in English from two different literary traditions, and to rethink the boundaries of literary production, the boundaries of, say, Arabic literature, Indian literature, Gulf literature, what makes these national literatures, what makes the boundaries that we use to think of these literatures in general. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. I'm with you that speaking of narratives and counter narratives is somewhat reductive, of a space which much more plural with different voices and not just official and counter official. So thank you, Nadine. We will come back to this in the question and answers part. Rana Al-Mutawa, the author of chapter 3, is not with us, I think, today. So I give the floor to the author of chapter 4, Jafar Alul, who belongs now to the Nanyang Technological University. And his chapter is Dubai as Heterotopia, the aspirational politics of everyday cosmopolitanism in Gulf space. Jafar is already connected with video and sound, so welcome Jafar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antia and Lorenzo. I am also going to second the other speakers that it is wonderful to be with you today. After such a long journey and all the effort that especially you guys also put into mentoring us along the way, and finally arriving at what has become a fascinating volume, which I think actually is a very original contribution to the field of Gulf studies, if you really unpack what is in the volume. And I would recommend everybody to have a scoop at it, because it really provides you some of the more subtle and actually, I would argue, complex insights on the region. I have a bit of a jet lag because I just arrived from Qatar, where I was doing field work. So do bear with me. But I am someone who has been specializing in sociology of migration, let's say. And for my PhD work, I was focusing on the so-called European expat population moving to the UAE. And specifically, I was looking at people with a minority background in Europe who, through education, became climbers in Europe, acquired tertiary education, and then sort of worked as engineers, bankers, architects in the Gulf. I did interviews, and I also lived in Dubai for a year in 2016. Where I hung out with them and also co-housed with them. So I did sort of a real deep ethnography of the population I was studying. Now, what I really wanted to do through this chapter was sort of, for myself mainly, make sense of the celebratory narratives that most of my people would voice about Dubai as a sort of emancipatory space, a space that gave them a certain degree of protection, a certain homeliness that they felt they had always lacked or had lacked in Europe. And this, at first sight, one would say, runs counter to the argument that the Gulf is a sort of exclusionary space where labor is only exploited, horrible place in the Arabian Peninsula where dystopias are built. So from that very situated and particular narrative on Dubai, I started thinking about how I could make analytical, sociological sense of what these people were saying very effectively, very emotionally, very positively charged about Dubai. I did so by reverting to a Bourdieusian analysis, a class analysis, and really transnational class making. So looking at the positions that people occupied before they left, and also really breaking down the social position that people took up after moving to the Gulf. And while looking at class, also looking at the diverging and altering race positions that people were able to engage in and also themselves transform. I looked at these sort of narrative indexes that I came along, really spoke to a sort of cosmopolitan affect. And in the end, my chapter is quite a theoretical piece, I would say, in a way, because I take the metaphor that was first coined by Foucault, heterotopia, and his original piece in French is called Des Espaces Autres, where he really tries to think about social space and really invites scholars to reflect together with him on micro spaces that indeed have, for those who engage in it, a very particular effect. And of course, if you know anything about Foucault's life, he himself used to engage with such spaces also in San Francisco in the homosexual milieus, which really ran counter to the norms that he was fighting against in Catholic France. So through his invitation to think about space, I sort of teased out this narrative metaphor of heterotopia. I documented it ethnographically, but then I sort of spoke back to it using Bourdieu's work on class positionality, class habitus, and really also showing that cosmopolitanism in and of itself is not some sort of neutral category that is out there, that it's really based on a status positionality, a positionality of privilege of these European citizens with an Arab Muslim background, which is of course sanctified by law in the UAE. And the reason really why I sort of try to speak back to this narrative metaphor of Foucault was because a lot of studies on the Gulf, when they focus on identity, on culture making, culture is often imagined an identification or identity as only belonging to ethnic identity or religion. And I wanted to show also that class in and of itself also comes with a culture. And I do think that people today often forget this. So I think that was my contribution, conglomerate of chapters which are very interdisciplinary. And I do think, if I may reflect just a brief moment on the volume as a whole does, I do think it is really speaking very originally to what is happening in the region, a region which used to be quite neglected in scholarly circles, either focusing on the Middle East or in the sociology of migration. But as other political scientists have already shown, the Gulf region is so important now in the entire Middle East, but also in the larger world from an economic standpoint, that it also really merits, I believe, for us to tease down, to break down and tease out the social and cultural developments that are happening on the ground. And, just a little anecdote from my research. For instance, now in Qatar, I was speaking to this long-term migrant of Arab origin, and he was provoking me. He said, "I dare you to find a local taxi driver, so a Qatari local taxi driver, and I dare you, Jafar, to find me a local who helps unloading the luggage at the airport." And of course, from at face value, he was right, and he was trying to make a point about inclusion, exclusion. But one can reflect indeed socio-culturally on what it means to be a local, right? If we take, for instance, Deepak's work on temporary people, I would say that his literary work is in and of itself an exponent, a very original exponent of literary production that comes out of the region. So it's an interesting moment. And us to be focusing on this region, and I hope we can do so much more in the future. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jafar. I say hello also to author Deepak Unnikrishnan, just joined us a while ago. But before leaving the floor to Deepak, I want to leave the floor to Shafiq Karim Kourail, who's the author of chapter 5, whose title is A Strangeness One Can Occupy, Clothes and Their Codes in the Photographs of Gulf Migrants from Kerala. Mohammed Shafiq Karim Kourail, who is there with video and sound, is a member of the Manipal Center for Humanities in Kerala. Hi, Shafiq.
Yeah, hello,
I see you.
So,
the floor is
thank
yours.
you, Antia, Lorenzo, organizers of this event. So I'll be very brief. So I have this chapter in the book, and in the chapter, I'm interested in the translational relations between the Gulf and the South Indian state of Kerala, where I'm from, which has by now a history of over 5 decades of large-scale circular migration of labor to the Gulf. So what my chapter does is to look at migrant photographs as a symbolic space which makes claims on behalf of these communities from which these migrants come in Kerala. And to know the nature of these claims, I look at sartoriality in these photographs. So much of the early migrants to the Gulf from Kerala were drawn from poor families and those with low educational capital. The Gulf was the single most important factor since the 1970s in reducing the poverty and unemployment rate and propelling the redistribution of wealth in Kerala. This is a factor which is spoken about much in Kerala, but not nearly as much as, I mean, generally the discourse is about the left government and stuff. So while we cannot overlook the importance of remittance and wage differential between the Gulf and Kerala, we also need to look beyond solely economic reason. So we also need to look at the process in which the Gulf, which is as much a fantastic space as it is a space of grueling labor, how is it translated in Kerala within the field of culture? So in a way, this chapter was prompted by the photographs of Gulf migrants that I've been working with for the past few years now. So my question was this: considering that it was in the Gulf where the migrants first experienced this on-your-face modernity in terms of a conscious break, know what life to be, and considering that their masters were Arabs, the question was, why wasn't this domination hegemonic in Kerala? In other words, why was the Gulf migrants' modernity expressed in tucked in shirts and neckties in these photographs, while the Arab was normally of and to answer this question, I look at my Gulf migrant presentation of modernity as part of this long struggle that is happening in India between various constituencies, in which the claim to modernity is also the claim to be treated with dignity. At the same time, I also wanted to show in an implied manner in my chapter that the seeming discursive forking between tradition and modernity doesn't really hold. And this is a very influential position in South Asian studies. But at least when it comes to sartoriality, which is what I have studied in my chapter, this is a dichotomy which doesn't hold. When it comes to sartoriality, it is much more helpful to see modernity as a particular expression of tradition, which is also different from saying that tradition is an invention of modernity, which it is, but such an invented tradition is also invented as a peculiar expression of the modern. This is very self-reflectively and not in a scholarly manner. This is, of course, an internalization of the colonial logic, but at the same time, this is also not assuming the position of a post-colonial other. So in the chapter, I draw upon works by scholars who show that modernity in Kerala is best represented not by a tucked in shirt, but this white wraparound, which is called mund, which also at the same time acquires the position of being the representative of Kerala identity. The emergence of Mund was also the story of emergence of many communities of Kerala, in Kerala into modernity from a depraved past. As I show in the context of Muslims in Kerala, since all my the migrants I engage with are Muslims, this was not a frictionless move because the Mund also becomes a marker of ideological and class positions. Munda is associated with educated Muslims who are mostly landed, while the stereotypical poor Muslim peasantry was identified with checkered lungis rather than munda, wide green belts around their waist, and white vests, that is, if at all they wore shirts. So it is within this intra and inter-constituency tensions that I read the sartoriality in migrant photographs. The chapter is also a reminder of the spectrality of photographs in another age, in their quality as archives, and not just in that indexical sense, archives of migrant memories, aspirations, and struggles. So that is what I hope you all enjoy reading the book. And over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shafiq. Deepak is here. Yeah, I can see him. Hi, Deepak. Deepak Unnikrishnan teaches at New York University, Abu Dhabi, and he is the author of the novel that Nadine Dattaq has already quoted and that she deals with in her chapter, Temporary People. So Deepak, the floor is yours. In the conclusions, I mean, they were in a dialogue, no, between you and me. Here, I leave the floor all to you to come up with what you like, what you want.
I think there's probably one certainty in life, which is you do not go in the beginning and you do not go at the end. So forgive me for what you're about to hear, because I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm usually comfortable with Zoom. This is different. I'll open with what's already been stated multiple times. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us. And thank you especially Lorenzo and Antia, because I think this is the first time I'm in a work of scholarship, so I can pretend to be a scholar. And I'm not being facetious, I'm really thankful. So what I can say is I wrote a book a few years ago called Temporary People, which has been referenced a few times here. And I do not know how to explain the book. The best I can tell you is it's a work that's sort of looking at language that has emerged from a space which would be the city of Abu Dhabi, as Nadine rightfully pointed out, and that's accurate. And it's also about trying to figure out what language means here, whether it could be written in English, but thought in Arabic or Malayalam or Urdu, etc. And I was interested in all of that because I started writing the book because I was trying to unearth or excavate what the space is. Now to the actual question, what is my contribution? Lorenzo sent me a bunch of questions to sort of think through. And as I thought through those questions, I realized that for me, when I write fiction, it really is about something that's incomplete. That's what the work of fiction to me is. It's me sort of struggling with the idea of what to do with an image, whether it's people or whether it's language. But when Lorenzo asked me straightforward questions about cities or what something is here, especially in Abu Dhabi, I had to really think it out. In other words, what I will say is the conversation at the end, which bookends the book, is an evolution of thought from someone who thought he knew what he was doing in the early days and now is trying to figure out what happened since. Jafar pointed out that, perhaps my work should sort of be attributed to the local canon, and I hope that happens, but I could also make the argument that the scholars in this room, even though this is not a room, we're pretending it's a room, should also be part of the local canon with respect to scholarship. And my hope is when the volume is read, thought through, and sort of debated about, people will also consider or give due consideration to artists and people and scholars to be in the same room, to have a conversation about what definitions need to be applied to the Gulf space. And I'm going to actually sort of stop there because I'm not the interesting thing in the book, if I'm being completely honest. And I'm not stating this because I'm humble, because I'm usually not. But for me, what's fascinating are the other contributors who are already here and those who cannot be present. Because for me, this is an exciting time. It's an exciting time simply because most of the people in this room, I've taught their work in the classrooms that I operate in, sort of labeling them and classifying them as individuals who are interested in, and I'm going to cite Jafar again, the subtlety of the Gulf and what the Gulf really is, it truly is, and what it can be. So that's what I did at the end of the day. I was asked a bunch of questions, straightforward questions by Lorenzo, and I tried my best to answer them. But let me end by saying what you really need to do is go to the beginning and take your time with the contributions, because hopefully it will outlive all of us. And maybe I'm being idealistic because of the pandemic, but at the end of the day, that's why I make work. because when I look at it 4 or 5 years down the line, I'm interested in whether it has lasted. And for me, the scholarship in this volume, and I'm not saying it because I'm in it, because like I said, mine is the least interesting contribution. My hope is when the volume is looked at 4 or 5 years down the line, it'll be a worthy contender to everything that is being stated 4 or 5 years down the line period. Because you're looking at scholars in the making, you're also looking at scholars who have something to say. And that's really cool. I don't think most conferences or events like this end with someone saying, that's really cool. But I mean that. And I'll stop there because I'm sure there are questions or people have thoughts. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deepak. I don't know if Maria is, I think she's still with us, and she asked if there are some questions. Before leaving the floor to Maria, I wanted just to comment on what Deepak just said. Really, when you, this is not modest on my part as an editor of the volume, but when one looks at the volume as it came out, it looks like a very consistent, work, very homogeneous, and I think it's quite miraculous because it was born out of a conference, but it doesn't look at all as a collection of conference papers, and this perhaps is also the result of what happened in Berlin. For example, I appreciated very much that Deepak Unnikrishnan, who is a novelist, was participating in the conference, which was an academic conference, contributing a lot to that. And for us, his work, his fictional work, was part of our reflection. It was like contributing to our reflection on the Gulf space. I think what came out of that conference, it's a group of scholars who have much in common. And the book, what the book shows, in my opinion, is that we have a lot in common. We share a lot on our approach to our object of reflection or our object of study. So it's really, I think it's quite miraculous how this came to happen, but I'm very happy about that result. So Maria, thank you for being here, and I don't know if you already have some questions.
Yeah, I mean, I find this presentation extraordinary and very thought-provoking, and very much in my line, actually, of how I envisage social science at the minute. I come from cultural studies originally, and I did my PhD studies on political violence in Cuba against homosexual communities, looking at the literary work of the very famous writer, a Cuban writer, Reinaldo Arenas, and other activists, cultural activists, writers, photographers, documentary makers, etc. So to me, this is my home, to really look into that migration issues, if you want, from that sort of interdisciplinary area. I can't not look into that from a purely social science perspective. And it seems to me like literary studies sometimes needs to grab that from social science and political studies and international politics, etc. So this is my ground, this is my area, really. So I'm very grateful, Antia and Lorenzo, for you today, for bringing this wonderful group of people. And I know that you went through the pandemic, and you mentioned that several times. So you've been writing throughout the whole process, and we all know how this has been for us academics, being more isolated, even more, if we could, just in front of our computers. So congratulations, guys, for doing this such a wonderful job. And Antia, please order this book now for the library, so we can add it to the reading lists, so students can,
yeah,
because is just fantastic. For I'm thinking about the students, postgraduate students from human rights and politics and international, and also KWASU, women and child abuse. And I'm thinking now about, well, a bit of everything. So I don't want to, I just want to ask you, everybody who's now listening to us, if you've got any question, if you can post it into, if you can write it into the chat, that would be fantastic. So we can know, we can now answer that, or you can really connect your micro and say your word and say your question and throw your questions to the authors. So I'm gonna just throw mine first, in my capacity of a deputy director, and I'm interested in Nadine, in your article, in your chapter about this second generation of people developing these counter narratives. Which links very much into what Deepak said about these literary studies and how the literature really represented all this. But I'm interested in knowing a bit more about this, what you found in this counter narrative written by second generation of people. That is very interesting.
Yes, thank you, Maria, for your question. Yeah, I mean, in this particular chapter, what I understood as counter narratives is just really the ability to conceptualize belonging to a place in a different way. And it may seem like something not very significant in other contexts, but I think in the context of the Gulf, where the way in which people articulate their belonging is very rigid because, or we think it's rigid because the conceptions, because the way citizenship and belonging and identity are conceptualized, and official discourses on that make you feel that this is the only way in which you can claim to belong to a place, and it sort of pushes you away from being able to express belonging in a different way. And even though that exists on the ground, what was very significant is seeing it claimed in the literature, seeing protagonists in the narratives saying, well, you know, I belong to the space, regardless of whether I perform a certain cultural identity, regardless of whether I look or don't look like a national of this country, and regardless of whether I have loyalty and allegiance to a place the way citizens are generally expected to. They're expected to project that identity in order to feel that they belong. So this is the way I see it as a counter narrative. But I think it was my comment on that was also that not all literature is like that. So it's very important to know that. And I think Elizabeth's paper was sort of on how art spaces and how cultural productions can actually be co-opted by the state to produce certain narratives, and writers themselves can also, you know, reproduce certain narratives as well, certain narratives of belonging to fit the general narrative that is produced by the state or by citizens.
It's very interesting to look into that sort of comparative studies between those who decided to jump on the ground and counter and produce some counter narratives, and those who just follow the trends and just adjust to that. And then, does anybody have any other question? I throw mine to editors and the rest of. I just wanted to very briefly, someone, I think that was Jafar, mentioned that this region has been neglected traditionally by academia and scholars, but quite recently it captured the attention. So I understand that you are all a good representation of that. So for you, what are the big challenges for all of you, really, Antia and also Lorenzo and the rest? What are the big challenges that you find to carry on with to develop your investigations on that particular area?
I think Jeff could maybe, if he wants to jump.
So when I say it was neglected, and now it is indeed. I mean, there is a focus now quite pertinent on the region, and the reason is twofold. I mean, it comes from the region itself being more and more dynamic, attracting more and more people, being more and more outspoken, the Expo, all these mega event projects, they're really drawing attention of the world, right? So that's one thing. On the other hand, a lot of Middle East scholars have to now
pivot because all the other countries in the Middle East are basically destroyed. So most of the people doing empirical social science research find themselves having to do research in the Gulf region, in the Arabian Peninsula, rather than the traditional Arab countries. That's just a side note. But what I find hard in the region, and this is actually a paper I want to write about, is the notion of studying up. Laura Nader has written about that, I think 1972. How in anthropology, social science, traditionally we tend to study communities that are easily accessible or that have less purchasing power than us or have less power in general. That doesn't mean that we do bad scholarship, not at all. I mean, there's fantastic scholarship out there. However, what is hard for me, both in my former PhD research and now, is that I study communities in the Gulf which are positioned as a sort of intermediate elite. You know, the native citizenry, and then they function as a sort of commercial elite. And to really get an understanding of their lives, if you want to participate in their lives, if you want to join them for dinner, that is not very easy to do. It's already hard to do social science research on site because of restrictions, but also to go for dinner with these people, for instance, and pay a few $100s for one night. This is not standard anthropological research. So I would like to do actually a piece on the difficulties of doing social science research in that region. And maybe we could even think of doing that together with the ones that have in some way or form done that. So that might be a follow-up for us to plan ahead for. Next.
I would like also to add something from somebody working on South Asia like me. I mean, the Gulf has opened an opportunity to do research, which also, I mean, in South Asia, in some countries in South Asia, we are seeing also similar developments. And in the Middle East, of course, there's no war formally, but political developments in countries like India, less probably in Pakistan, allow you that some of the migrants communities which are living in the Gulf, I mean, it's an opportunity for us to approach them and to understand what also is going on in these countries. This is also a reality. So it is interesting because on the one hand, we are debating issues like citizenship, which is not being challenged in countries like India traditionally. And now we see that doing research in the Gulf or doing field work in the Gulf opens you possibilities to examine these developments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I don't know if anyone wants to participate from the audience, if they want to raise any questions or.
Yeah. We don't have any other question here in the chat. Does anybody want to connect the micro perhaps and voice her question or their questions into these? So I guess the closest. Yes, go ahead, Deepak.
Sorry, I can perhaps share a resource which might be useful connected to the discourse occurring now in the chat box. So this is an edition put out by The Common, which is a literary magazine in the US, and it's what they call the Arabian Gulf or Arabian Peninsula edition. And in this volume, you have individuals who have roots in the Gulf, and what I mean by that is they were here for a while and then they left, or they continue to remain, and they've contributed to this volume. And I find it particularly interesting, partly because when I started writing what I did, at the time, you know, I had family members and friends who refused to talk about belonging, what it means to belong to a place, because it was a sensitive issue. But then at some point, a few years down the line, the state interfered. And when I say the state, I mean the country sort of decided that it's permissible now to talk about it. So Beth's brief on her chapter, about her chapter, is also interesting to me, because once the state decides something is permissible, then it's no longer arguably a form of resistance when you talk about it. So as someone who writes fiction, I'm sort of wondering, what do I do now? because I'm now, the diaspora guy or the migration guy. And I think scholars sort of fall into the trap of being labeled as something too. And riffing off on what Jafar said earlier, I would pay good money for someone to study professors, not necessarily to study the intermediate elite. I would like to be embedded in the house of an anthropologist who works for an elite university, like the one I worked for, to see what sort of discourse plays out there, because we are participants, right? I think what's happening now is you have individuals who feel as though they want to contribute to the conversation because most of the contributions were imported. But now they wish to have a say. So there is some sort of transition that is occurring. I'm not sure where it's going. But, as someone who's a literary practitioner, my goal is to sort of upend or disrupt, because that's what I'm interested in. Not necessarily because I'm not interested in normative tales, but it keeps me on my toes. So this particular volume that I reference, and I'll end quickly, is fascinating to me because you have individuals in there who are not talking about what they're expected to talk about. So there's the expectation of someone from here too. What does that mean? And we have the politics of transnational discourse, because you're also talking about individuals who don't necessarily have to be in the place to talk about the place. Noor Naga, the editor, is based out of Cairo and Canada. Then Mona Karim is in the US. I am here, right? So, but we can still contribute, even though we are from different spaces. So the idea of thinking through or thinking about individuals raised in the Gulf as satellites who are in conversation with each other, who do not need to be in a fixed space to talk about the place, to me is a disruptive act, is a necessary act, and a useful act. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Deepak. And yeah, it very much I think it links with the notion of imagined communities and imaginary communities that Lorenzo was referring at the beginning of his presentation. Yeah, imagine those communities and not being, as Deepak said, physically there, but just yeah, looking at that from outside with that perspective. Do we have any other question that we want to, or any other comments from contributors, editors, that you want to raise, and perhaps now enjoy the possibility to, now that you're in the same virtual room, enjoy perhaps the possibility to talk a bit about something that you want to raise. Don't miss the opportunity.
No, it's amazing because it's the first time we have the chance to meet each other, and it would be nice to hear from the audience what they are thinking about these reflections. Of course, they haven't read the book, and so it's difficult, but some of them, I know that some people in the audience know very well this work, and I don't know, it would be interesting to share comments. 2 years, we never imagined that this would happen 2 years ago. For instance.
Yeah, do we have anybody who wants to make a comment? Lorenzo, did you want to make a comment?
No, I was just also thinking, I was just thinking that perhaps people are starting to be, quite tired also of this way of communicating, no? And we all, it's not the same thing to be in physically, no, in the same space. Deepak was saying, so we feel that we are sharing the same room, but actually it's not the same. And I think this modality of participating to conferences or discussing a book reminds us of the 2 years, no, that we just came across. And we really feel, no, the need to overcome all this and come together physically, look at each other in the eyes and sit together, and also it's a way to give life to a book like this. I think also a problem really is that the book has not circulated very much. I'm with you, Deepak. So, I mean, I hope there will be more possibilities to present this book again when people will have read it. And but I think it's, I mean, it was the first chance to present our work, to see each other. To see each other and prepare a live presentation where we will be able to share a physical space together. I think we have to work on that.
Well, thank you. Of course. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say something on Andrew's comment. I think this was quite an experiment, and we didn't know very much the outcome. Basically, when we selected those participants, we were thinking about, of course, we selected people on the basis we got very wonderful proposals, and we engaged in a discussion because of certain issues that were interested to us. So I think this whole journey, I mean, I think it has changed a lot, our understanding also of our project in the beginning. And we really, of course, everybody is happy about having a book published, but we are specifically happy for the value that this book has. I mean, the fact that we have been working with Shafiq in Kerala, and this was not, for instance, it's something which is not an easy process, and that's why we are also very happy to, I mean, I'm quite happy to my former research center, the ZMO, because provide us the opportunity to do this, and also to work with people like Nadine in the UK. So this way of communicating was possible because there was a certain kind of research possibilities to do that, no? So, and in the end, we're very happy with the outcome. I think it has a value more than academic value. It's a testimony of something. And yeah, I think it's a groundbreaking work, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's not just for the only writer who is present among the authors of the book, but also for some scholars. I think the question, I think, for example, about Nadine or Shafiq himself or Jafar. I mean, I think the research they are doing is very much related to the experience or a personal experience or the experience of a region, you know, like Kerala for Shafiq, or a community to, I think, with which Jafar has a lot of relationship. So I think the beauty of this work is that brings together scholarship with life. No, I think it's not a vision from an ivory tower. It is something that emerges from experience, from something which is, I mean, felt very strongly. And I said in the introduction, at the end, what is astonishing is how the different chapters dialogue with each other, because they explore different dimensions. But at the end, we are talking about the same phenomena. No, I think.
And I actually think you raised something quite important there, Lorenzo, sort of connected to life and also experience, being connected to groups you study, or, you know, having passion about your object of study. But I really felt also during the conference, you know, seeing I had read already Deepak's work, but to write and to bring to life your writing is really hard. And I think that is the thing we may share indeed, is whether there's so many hours of observation, lived experience, or research going into to a piece of writing, and then to elevate that it has that it transcends that dryness is really an art. And I do think that that is exactly what is shared also in literary works. I mean, there's so much lived experience behind there. So whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I think that's the binding force. And that is really a challenge I find in writing to really bring it alive. And there's a long road ahead, but I was inspired by the workshop, the conference that you did. So yeah, thanks a lot for that.
I don't know if I mean, Nadine, Shafiq, they want to add something, or Deepak.
Can I just say something small? I mean, it's just I'm just thinking that I think what's useful is that and obviously I'm not an expert. I've been working on the Gulf for a few years. I'm not like a Gulf expert, but in a way, most of the volumes that do get published on the Gulf are very much disciplinary. So and this is why, I mean, I wouldn't be, as someone who works on literature, it's very interesting for my chapter, for example, to be published alongside a chapter that is that adopts an ethnographic or an anthropological methodology, or a chapter that is more concerned with art in the case of Beth's chapter, and so on and so forth. So because it's mostly disciplinary, the kinds of conversations that happen in those books are restrained by that. So it's an opportunity to actually think, and also obviously we already addressed that. So what is the value of bringing different disciplines together when we're talking about the same phenomena but from different perspectives? And what is the value of bringing art and literature, and also the perspective of an author, a fiction writer, together with critical perspectives that are usually very much restricted to academic spaces and that do not really get shared as the way fiction circulates, right? So it's just, but also there are challenges. So I would actually be interested in hearing your own, like Lorenzo and Antia, whether you've had any challenges in reconciling, bringing together these perspectives together. I'm always interested in limitations rather than, like, yes, there are good things that come with bringing interdisciplinary work together, but there are challenges. There are things that need to be compromised, perhaps. Again, I'm just throwing ideas here. There are things that can't be reconciled. What goes lost? What is lost when we actually bring so many different perspectives together in one volume, and what is gained? Obviously, I can't tell so much because I've only engaged in the conversations that happened in the workshop, and I can see the value of that. I wasn't involved so much in the process of bringing the book together, so perhaps these are challenges that you have been more involved in, and also whether Shafiq or Jafar or any of you have any comments on that. So basically, yeah, the interdisciplinarity of the project in general.
Yeah, it was personally for me a very difficult chapter to write because basically I'm also writing about something which is very difficult to speak about, in the sense of spectrality of photographs and how they play a social role, and within these photographs, these clothes. So I should. It was that way, like, because we had the workshop, it was actually something of a confidence builder, because I knew that, okay, so there has been some kind of reception to these ideas, and you know very well how many drafts we had to go through in order to reach at this final. I mean, there are all these different ways of putting things, and like no, there's one particular comment, actually. I mean, I should really mention this. So somewhere in that my first chapter, it is said, and then I see this comment, who says this? I'm thinking, it is said, it is said. And I mean, the kind of, the kind of rigor which has gone into that editing, and we had, I think, some 3 drafts or something of the paper. So I really thank for that kind of, because, I mean, ultimately I was speaking something really abstract, though nothing very theoretical. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thanks, Shafiq. No, I think regarding the question of interdisciplinarity, I don't know. I think we made an exercise to speak to each other, and I think the different chapters. The good thing about this work is that the different chapters speak to each other. And I realized that, or this is what I have learned over the years, is that when you were in the margins, basically you are addressing something which is central. I mean, and now I realize that some of our work sticks to very central issues that we are. I mean, citizenship is something which is very central in the Gulf. I mean, when I understood the Gulf model, I also tried to reflect critically about Europe. And also even I thought, well, this is the direction in which Europe is thinking about citizenship issues in a way. So, or the discussion on citizenship. So it's quite interesting to understand. This is what I see is that also the debate of literature that you are discussing, Nadim, is what is Gulf literature? In which language? Is there any language, or it's just very too many issues, no? So I think
what do you mean? Is there a language?
No, in this we have this nation-state mentality, which is framed our lives very much, but the world has changed. The Gulf societies show that these have changed a lot. So this is the
yeah. With respect to the question of Nadine, it was not hard work to bring together these chapters. Actually, I think, Nadine, that the miracle I was referring to is that the chapters that came out that you gave us, even if in the first draft they were already speaking to each other very, very well. And also, if you remember, Nadine, sometimes I invited you to be more like disciplinary. No, I said, okay, because sometimes I told you, okay, this is a very good sociological approach, no, but let the text speak more. Or so I think there is no problem when you analyze similar phenomena from different disciplinary angles, because at the end, what it matters most is not the discipline, but the questions to which you are trying to answer. And I think that what all the contributors share in this book and the editors are similar questions, and also similar assumptions, no? Assumptions about a certain worldview, and this is, I think, is reflected in the chapters. Perhaps perhaps the only chapter with a different kind of narrative or research questions is the one by Rana Al-Mutawa. But I think, and that chapter is very anthropological, no? It is very in its research questions and the way it's written. But it is very good. Also, I think it speaks very well to the other chapters, because it brings in the perspective of Emirati women that share the space of Dubai. So we have that space. We see that space through the work. Not the space of Dubai, but the space of other cities in the Gulf, through the work by Nadine Dakak. We see the perspective of the migrant, European migrants of Maghrebi origins who share the space of Dubai, no? And their perception of that space in the work of Jafar. So it is very good how Emirati women experience that space and look at migrants and Europeans, Westerners, Rana says in her chapter. So at the end, I think also this chapter, Rana is the only scholar who was not present in Berlin.
But she kindly agreed to participate.
Yeah, she kindly agreed to participate, and I think also she added something very good to this book, to this volume. So it was not, at the end, I mean, we felt we had gold in our hands, just to, and it was very easy to shape it. I mean, it was a normal process of editing, but I didn't think that the disciplinary differences created any kind of problem in the process of editing.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if Andrew wrote something.
Yes. No, it's just added in the comment by Andrew. Yeah. We agree with that. Yes, reading is an issue.
Okay. Does anybody have any other question or comment? Okay, so thank you so much, Antia and Lorenzo, and of course the contributors of this thought-provoking and excellent book. I am just looking forward to read. So yes, Antia, please order this order a couple of copies just in case the students get curious about it, and let's gonna add it to the reading list. And yes, well, what can I say? Well, I love these presentations. They are very, as I said, thought-provoking, and it puts so much things in the ground and make you think about ways to move forward in this, in our research. So I will say goodbye to you, but not forever, but just for now, because I hope you really keep an eye on the website in the center and consider the possibility to register in any of these events that we are organizing, very much like the one we did today. So, and I think they very much appeal to your own research. We just, as a final note, Luis and I, we are both conducting a research project about Afghan migrants in London. And we are now reading and getting to know much more about not your specific area, very close to that, and how those people just, those evacuees who left Kabul in August 2021, how they perceive England and how they do, still many of them in shock, but still how they start to now thinking through the notions of national identity, sense of belonging, home, citizenship, very important topic that it's very much addressed in those conversations and interviews that we're now holding with this group of people. And of course, in the case of Afghan women, gender issues too, but also for males. So that is the closest I came to the area that you're looking into. So I'm really curious to read about, and looking forward to read about your volumes. I'm recommended throughout. So without further ado, I have to say goodbye. Just remember that this event has been recorded and will be uploaded to the website, just in case you want to forward it and send it to your own networks, students, etc. And we are here. We don't go anywhere. Luis and I, we are always open to hear about you and see if we can perhaps next academic year do another event following up. Antia, I leave it to you. Just keep us informed about how you progress with all this wonderful network that you've got. If you just create another project, etc., we'll be happy to hear about it, and perhaps do another presentation.
Yeah, just a question. Are you thinking about doing presential, conferences from the next year?
On site.
Yes. Well, we need to discuss it with the university. We need to see how the university wants to move towards that. But yeah, we'll keep you informed. Yes, that would be ideal, Lorenzo, to go back to this face-to-face event, etc. So yes, we are very much looking forward to that too. It will be, I think it will be like synchronic thing. We do it in face-to-face and then at the same time online, but we need to know how it will go. Okay, so Anna just posted the centers page. So navigate through that and have a look at the next events that we've got. And yes, as I said, we're looking forward to hear about you. So yes, without further ado, I have to say goodbye. Very nice to meet you all, and thank you so much for your contribution today. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Maria.
Good night, Shafiq.